Namaskar, I am Sonam Singh and you are watching Organiser This Week, your weekly analysis of the most important stories, ideas and conversations featured in the latest edition of Organiser Weekly. This week's issue is a special education edition centered around one of the Bharat's most influential spiritual and educational movements, the art of living, which is completing 45 years this year. The cover story features an extensive and deeply philosophical conversation between Organiser editor Shri Prafulla Ketkar and Gurudev Shri Ravi Shankar. But this issue goes far behind spirituality. It also explores education, artificial intelligence, Indian knowledge systems, the future of universities, youth anxiety, skill development, civilizational consciousness, and the larger idea of what education should mean in a country aspiring to become Viksit in 2047. From the legacy of Nalanda University to the issues related to the examination system, from RSS-inspired schools in Naxalbari to the reclamation of Bhojshala, from Gurukuls and value education to demographic dividend and AI. This issue attempts to answer one important question: what kind of education does Bharat need in the 21st century? So let us begin with the cover story. The central feature of this issue is a long and reflective interview with Gurudev Shri Ravi Shankar, who is the founder of the Art of Living Foundation, which today operates in more than 180 countries. The conversation begins with a very simple question but a very profound question from Shri Prafulla Ketkar. When Gurudev looks back at the 45 years long journey, how does he see it? And Gurudev responds with a philosophical and most summarized answer: clarity in mind, purity in heart, sincerity in action. He says every individual comes into this world with a role to play and no role is small. According to him, the art of living was not born out of some dramatic turning point of crisis in his life. Rather, it unfolded naturally. One of the most fascinating parts of this conversation is when Gurudev speaks about the relationship between science and spirituality. He completely rejects the Western idea that spirituality and science are opposites. He says Indian civilization never separated questioning from spirituality. In fact, Bharat's philosophical traditions encourage experimentation, observation, and inquiry exactly like science does. He points to the Prashna Upanishad, where asking questions itself becomes sacred. And then comes a very interesting discussion around artificial intelligence. Today, everybody talks about prompts for ChatGPT, prompts for AI systems. Gurudev says true transformation does not happen merely through information. It happens through energy, experience, and of course consciousness. That distinction becomes information and wisdom becomes one of the key themes of this issue. The interview also touches on conflict resolution, global tensions, and the role of spiritual movements in a fractured world. Gurudev says conflicts ultimately arise from lack of trust and lack of communication, and therefore peace building requires people who can talk to all sides without prejudice. The interview is philosophical, civilizational, and deeply contemporary at the same time. The next major conversation is with Bhanumati Narasimhan, the chairperson of the Women's Welfare and Childcare Programs at the Art of Living and of course the sister of Gurudev Shri Ravi Shankar. This interview focuses on girls' education, empowerment, emotional resilience, and rural transformation. One remarkable detail mentioned in this conversation is that nearly 49% of the students in their institutions are girls. In many villages where educating girls was once considered unnecessary, these institutions have managed to change social attitudes over decades. She also speaks about how urban India can actually learn from rural women, especially values like sharing, caring, and emotional strength. There is an important philosophical point she makes that social transformation begins with individual transformation. If people themselves are stressed, angry, and emotionally exhausted, society will reflect the same stress. And that is why yoga, meditation, and inner balances are not luxuries but social necessities. This issue also carries excerpts from Prime Minister Narendra Modi's speech delivered during the 45th anniversary celebration of the Art of Living in Bengaluru. PM Modi calls service the foundational principle of Bharat civilization. He says Bharat's diversity survives because one of the most civilizational value it has, that is, living not merely for oneself but for others. The Prime Minister praises the art of living for combining spirituality with social service, whether through environmental campaigns, rural development, tribal welfare, mental health, or youth engagement. One particularly important section of his speech focuses on youth and technology. PM Modi says Bharat is becoming a global leader in startups, digital payments, and innovation, but technological progress must be accompanied by emotional and spiritual balances. He says people today are connected digitally but disconnected internally, and perhaps that is one of the strongest lines from his entire speech. Now moving to the next report, this is the most detailed report in this issue. This article explores how the art of living has created a massive education ecosystem across Bharat, especially in rural and tribal regions. According to this report, the movement runs more than 1,500 educational institutes, out of which over 1,300 are free schools. The scale itself is astonishing. More than 1.2 lakh children study in these schools across 22 states and over 2,000 villages. But what makes these institutions unique is not merely accessibility, it is the philosophy behind. The schools attempt to combine modern education with Indian civilizational values. Students here learn yoga, Sanskrit shloks, local traditions and cultural roots while simultaneously studying modern subjects, computers, science and of course AI. One of the most beautiful images described in the report is of Gurukul students wearing traditional dhoti veshti along with using computers and playing basketball. The article repeatedly emphasizes that education should not become limited to examinations and information transfer. Instead, education must build emotional intelligence, cultural confidence, creativity, and of course, the ethnical grounding. There is also a major focus on peer learning, experiential learning, and community participation. And perhaps the most aspiring aspect is the work done in neglected regions, including tribal areas, slums, and the Northeast. The article describes how schools in places like Dharavi are combining education with counseling, yoga, and even robotics training. This is not merely an educational network, it is being presented as a civilizational model for the entire country. Another important section of this issue carries a long opinion piece by Atul Kothariji from Shiksha Sanskriti Uttanyas. This article examines the idea of Viksit Bharat 2047 through the lens of education. The argument here is very simple but very powerful. Bharat cannot become truly developed merely through GDP growth or technological advancement. Development must include ethics, social harmony, spirituality, environmental balance, and cultural confidence. The article argues that Bharatiya civilization never saw development as purely material. Instead, it emphasized the balance of dharma, arth, kam, and moksha. The piece strongly supports the National Education Policy 2020 and argues that Indian knowledge systems must become an integral part of modern education. At the same time, the article recognizes the importance of AI, digital technology, and emerging industries. So, this is not just a rejection of modernity, rather it is an attempt to harmonize Bharatiya knowledge traditions with modern science and technology. And that synthesizes becomes one of the defining intellectual themes of the edition. So the next topic is the most relevant and contemporary interviews in this issue with former UGC chairman M. Jagdish Kumar. The conversation revolves around the recent NEET controversy and the larger issues surrounding India's entrance examination ecosystem. Jagdish Kumar explains that NTA handles nearly 70 national level examinations every year, including JEE, NEET, CUET and UGC NET. Combined, these examinations involved around 1 crore students. The scale itself is extraordinary. The interview discusses the issues related to pen and paper examinations and why computer-based testing may become necessary in the future. He explains how CBT system reduces the risk associated with printing, transportation and handling of question papers. But perhaps the most important point he makes is psychological. He says students must be reassured during moments of anxiety. In a country where competitive exams determine futures, paper leaks and cancellation do not merely disrupt schedules, they emotionally devastate lakhs of families. This interview is extremely relevant for students, parents and policymakers alike. Another major feature in this issue is the interview with Nalanda University Vice Chancellor Professor Sachin Chaturvedi. The conversation revolves around the idea of rebuilding Nalanda not merely as a university but as a global intellectual center rooted in Asian civilizational dialogue. The interview discusses how ancient Nalanda was never just an Indian institution. It was a center, international center, where scholars from across Asia came together. Today's Nalanda University is trying to revive that similar spirit. The discussion also touches upon Buddhism, global diplomacy, sustainability studies, and India's role in knowledge leadership. There is a strong emphasis on interdisciplinary education and creating spaces where philosophy, policy, culture, and science can interact together. This issue also carries a very important interview with Shriman Adinarayan and Dr. Ananthalakshmi, the founders of Anadi Foundation. Their central argument is that values cannot be taught only intellectually. Children do not absorb values merely through lectures or textbooks. Values emerge through lived experiences, immersed environments, and role models. This connects back beautifully with the larger theme of the issue, that education is not only about employment, it is also about shaping human beings. One of the most emotionally powerful stories in this issue comes from Naxalbari, a place historically associated with left-wing extremism. The report documents how an RSS-inspired school has gradually transformed the educational and social atmosphere of that particular region. What was once a region associated with violence and ideological conflict is slowly witnessing educational and cultural renewal. The article highlights rising student numbers, value education, discipline, and social confidence among children. It becomes a story not merely about schooling but about long-term social transformation that is taking place in Naxalbari. This issue also covers the Bhojshala complex case verdict. The report frames the judgment as a larger act of civilizational reclamation. The article argues that places associated with Bharat's knowledge traditions and cultural memory are not merely archaeological sites, they are a symbol of civilizational continuity. Connected to this is another report on the reclamation and reputation of Chola-era copper plates and Jain manuscripts. Together, these reports emphasize the importance of preserving civilizational memory of Bharat. So, overall, this edition of Organiser is not just about education policy, it is about larger civilizational questions. Can Bharat create an education model that combines technology advancement with ethical grounding? Can artificial intelligence coexist with spiritual intelligence? Can universities become centers of meaning instead of merely factories of degrees? Can development remain human? Can education create not only successful individuals but balanced and responsible citizens? This edition attempts to answer all these questions through interviews, reports, philosophical reflections, and field stories. If you want to understand the large debate around education, culture, spirituality, youth anxiety, AI, and Bharat's future, this issue becomes extremely important for you. So do read the full edition of Organiser Weekly. If you like this video, do like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Thank you so much for watching.